It was a late night at SpaceX headquarters. The soft hum of computers and the occasional rustle of papers were the only sounds in the vast darkened room. Elon Musk, who had barely noticed the passing hours, sat hunched over his desk, eyes locked on his glowing screen. His mind was racing through equations, designs, and endless plans. But tonight, he had one last task to complete. A final email to read, one more problem to solve. The clock on the wall flickered past 11:42 p.m., a reminder of the long day that had nearly come to a close. Yet Elon wasn't ready to leave. He never was. Not tonight, at least. He scrolled through his inbox, as he did every evening, hoping to catch any important messages that might have slipped through his personal assistant's filtering system. But most of it was routine. Emails from his companies, investors, even fans. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, piled up each day, each asking for his attention, a sliver of his time. But Elon didn't mind. This was the world he had built. As he was about to shut down his laptop for the night, an email with a familiar subject caught his eye. "Do you remember me from Wharton?" Elon paused, hesitating for a moment. Most emails with subjects like that were from people seeking attention, or even money. But something about this one felt different. He clicked open the message, and the name at the top stopped him cold. Rudy Thornton. Rudy Thornton. Professor Thornton. His college professor. The man who had believed in him when everyone else thought his ideas were impossible. The message read, "Dear Elon, I hope this message finds you well. It's been many years since our time together at Wharton, and I understand that you've been incredibly busy with all your remarkable ventures. I followed your journey with great pride, from PayPal to Tesla, SpaceX, and beyond. I'm sorry to reach out under these circumstances. I wouldn't bother you if I had anywhere else to turn. Life has dealt me some difficult cards lately, and I find myself in a position I never expected. Last year, my wife Carol passed away after a prolonged illness. The medical bills took everything we had saved, and I had to sell our home to cover the remaining expenses. Now I'm living in a small apartment in Philadelphia. My pension barely covers the basics, and to be honest, I hate to admit this, but next month's rent is due, and I simply don't have the funds to cover it. I never imagined I would find myself in such a position, especially reaching out to a former student for help. But here I am. I completely understand if you cannot assist. I know you are a busy man with many demands. Either way, watching your success has brought me great joy in these difficult times. Warm regards, Rudy Thornton." Elon sat back in his chair, stunned. The words on the screen felt almost unreal. Professor Thornton, the same man who had supported his wildest ideas all those years ago, was struggling just to make ends meet. Memories flooded Elon's mind. He remembered sitting in the classroom at Wharton, listening to Professor Thornton lecture with passion, his eyes alive with excitement about the future. He had never laughed at Elon's bizarre ideas, never dismissed them as childish fantasies. Instead, he had encouraged him to think bigger, to dream beyond the confines of what was currently possible. Elon could still hear Professor Thornton's voice. "We don't know what's impossible until someone does it. Why shouldn't that someone be you?" He closed his eyes, feeling a mix of guilt and gratitude wash over him. How long had it been? 20 years? More? Elon had meant to stay in touch, but life moved so quickly. One company after another, one breakthrough after the next, always looking ahead, rarely looking back. But now his former professor, who had been the first person to believe in him, needed his help. Elon could easily send the money. A few $1,000s wouldn't even make a dent in his accounts. But something didn't feel right. It felt too impersonal, too easy. Professor Thornton deserved more than a brief transfer and a thank you note. Elon deleted the draft of his reply and grabbed his phone. He dialed his assistant, Vera, ignoring the late hour. "Vera," Elon said when she picked up, her voice groggy with sleep. "Sorry to call so late. I need you to clear my schedule for Thursday and Friday. Book the jet for a trip to Philadelphia tomorrow. Personal matter." There was a long pause on the other end before Vera spoke again. "Philadelphia? At this hour? Elon, is everything okay?" "I'll explain when I get back," Elon said, cutting the conversation short before she could ask more questions. He hung up, feeling a surge of urgency. What exactly was he planning to do? He wasn't entirely sure yet, but he knew that he couldn't just send money. This wasn't just about charity, it was about doing something meaningful, something that could change the course of both their lives. Elon swiveled his chair to face the window, staring out at the quiet SpaceX campus below. The factory floor was dark, empty, save for a few stray lights shining off the metal structures. In that stillness, he thought of Professor Thornton, the man who had helped shape his career, his future. And for all his success, Elon knew he couldn't have done it alone. He looked back at the computer screen, scrolling through the details of the professor's life: medical bills, a sold home, an empty bank account. It didn't add up. Rudy Thornton had been a well-respected academic, a man with a career that had once been promising. He had written books, consulted for major companies, and always lived a stable, comfortable life. But now the professor was living in a rundown part of Philadelphia, struggling to make ends meet. Something was missing. Elon couldn't help but feel that there was more to this story, something the professor hadn't shared. Elon spent another hour digging through property records, tax information, and medical facilities in the area. By the time he shut down his computer, it was well past 1 a.m. His mind raced with questions and possibilities, but the most pressing one was, how had it come to this? Before heading to bed, Elon made a final decision. He wasn't going to just send a check. He was going to rebuild Professor Thornton's life. He would make sure that the man who had believed in him when no one else did would have a chance at something better. The next morning, Elon woke early, his mind already on the plane ride ahead. As he headed to the airport, he reflected on the old promise he had made to Professor Thornton. They had both dreamed of something bigger, something more significant, but somewhere along the way, Elon had lost sight of that. Now it was time to make things right. Elon boarded his private jet, the city of Los Angeles already fading behind him. He thought about the last time he had been to Philadelphia, back when he was still a college student with wild dreams and 1,000 doubts. Now he was a billionaire, an entrepreneur with the power to change the world. But somehow, in all his success, he had forgotten to keep the promises that really mattered. As the plane soared into the sky, Elon looked out the window, his thoughts drifting back to that classroom and the professor who had made him believe in himself when no one else did. Elon Musk sat quietly in the back of his private jet, gliding through the clouds toward Philadelphia. He had always been a man driven by goals, always focused on the next big challenge. But tonight, his mind was elsewhere, back to the classrooms of Wharton and the professor who had believed in him when no one else did. Elon had only ever shared his wildest dreams with a few select people, but Professor Thornton was the first to see potential in him. The professor had never dismissed his lofty ideas about electric cars, space travel, or building tunnels under cities. Instead, he'd encouraged them. Back then, Elon was just another unknown student in a sea of ambitious undergraduates. But Professor Thornton was different. He saw something that no one else had. He saw Elon's potential to reshape industries and make impossible dreams a reality. They had made a pact, one that Elon hadn't fully realized he had forgotten. In the spring before graduation, Elon had shared his dream of creating an innovation springboard, a place where young inventors could get resources, support, and funding to bring their ideas to life. At the time, Elon had no idea how he would make it happen, but he promised the professor that when he made his first billion, he would return to fulfill that vision. But life had gotten in the way. One company led to another, success followed by more success, and Elon had moved forward without looking back. He kept his promises to investors, to customers, but the promise to Professor Thornton had remained a distant memory. Now, sitting in the back of his jet, Elon realized that the professor had always been there, quietly waiting for him to remember. As the plane descended into Philadelphia, Elon felt a knot form in his stomach. He had built so much, but the most important thing had been forgotten. The idea that had shaped his vision for so long was now forgotten, and Professor Thornton had paid the price. The professor was no longer the confident academic who had challenged him in class. He was now just a man struggling to make ends meet in a rundown apartment, living a life far removed from the one he deserved. Elon pulled into the small parking lot of the apartment building. The weathered structure stood in stark contrast to the shiny modern buildings he had grown accustomed to. The street was lined with aging cars and boarded-up storefronts. This wasn't the professor he remembered. The man who had once stood with him in a bright classroom, sharing dreams of a better world, was now reduced to this. He stepped out of the car, hesitating for a moment before heading up the stairs to the third floor. The hallway was dim, the carpet worn, the walls in need of a fresh coat of paint. When he reached the door, he knocked softly, unsure of what kind of welcome he would receive. He hadn't seen Professor Thornton in years, and he had no idea how their reunion would go. But he had to try. He had to do what was right. The door creaked open, revealing an older man with graying hair and tired eyes. He didn't recognize Elon at first. So many students had passed through his classroom over the years. But when the professor looked into Elon's eyes, he knew immediately who he was. "Is it really you?" Professor Thornton's voice trembled. "Elon, I can't believe it." Elon smiled, feeling a surge of relief. "It's me, Professor. I thought it would be better to come in person, rather than just replying to your email." Professor Thornton stepped aside, letting Elon into the small apartment. The space was cramped, cluttered with books and papers. It looked nothing like the professor's old home in the suburbs, a place where he had once lived comfortably. Now it was a far cry from what Elon had expected. "I'm sorry about the mess," the professor muttered, motioning for Elon to sit. "I don't get many visitors these days." Elon settled into the old chair, feeling the weight of the years between them. The man who had shaped his career, the man who had believed in him when no one else did, was now living in this humble apartment. Elon couldn't believe it. This wasn't how things were supposed to turn out. "No need to apologize," Elon said, his voice soft. "I'm just glad to see you, Professor." There was a long silence between them as the professor moved slowly toward the kitchen to make tea. Elon watched him, feeling a deep sense of guilt and responsibility. He hadn't just let down the professor, he had forgotten the most important promise he had ever made. As the professor filled the kettle, Elon felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had made a name for himself, built companies, changed industries, and now he was coming back to make things right. He wasn't going to just write a check. No, he owed Professor Thornton more than that. He owed him the opportunity to fulfill the dream they had both shared. "Would you like some tea?" the professor asked, breaking Elon's thoughts. Elon nodded. "Tea sounds good." As Professor Thornton poured the tea, Elon glanced around the apartment again. It wasn't much, but it was the life the professor had now. The life he had been left with after everything. After Carol's passing, the medical bills, the house he had to sell, it was all too much. Professor Thornton handed Elon a mug, settling across from him at the table. "I've followed your career, you know," he said, his voice quieter now. "I'm proud of you. I always knew you'd go far." Elon's heart tightened. "I wish I had done more. I wish I had kept my promise sooner." The professor smiled faintly. "Life doesn't always work out the way we plan. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices." Elon nodded, his mind racing. "Professor, I'm here to make things right. We're going to build the innovation springboard, not just as an idea, but as something real. I'm going to make it happen." Professor Thornton raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What do you mean by that? You're going to build it?" "Yes," Elon said, his determination clear. "This time we're going to do it right. It will be a place where young innovators can come, get resources, and bring their ideas to life. And I'll be here every step of the way to make sure it works." The professor stared at him for a moment, unsure if he should believe it. Elon could see the hesitation in his eyes. How could anyone believe that a man who had been absent for so long could suddenly make such a bold promise? "I know it's hard to believe," Elon continued, "but I'm serious. I'm not just here to help with rent. I'm here to make this vision a reality." Professor Thornton remained silent, sipping his tea, but Elon could see the spark of hope in his eyes again. The same spark he had seen all those years ago when they first talked about the springboard. For a moment, there was only silence between them, but it was a different kind of silence than before. This one was filled with possibility, with hope, and with the promise of something bigger than either of them could have imagined. "I never thought I'd hear those words," the professor said, finally breaking the silence. "But maybe we can do this after all." Elon smiled. "We will." Elon stood up from his seat, his eyes scanning the small, cluttered apartment. The quiet was heavy around them, broken only by the occasional hum of the kettle. The professor had been so important to him, a steady presence during those early years, someone who believed in him when the rest of the world saw only crazy ideas and delusions. Yet here he was now, living in these cramped quarters, struggling with the weight of life's harshest realities. "Elon," Professor Thornton said, his voice softer now, "I can't tell you how much it means that you're here. I never expected this, especially not after all these years." Elon's gaze softened. "I should have been here sooner." Professor Thornton looked out the window, his eyes distant. "Time changes things, Elon. You move forward, you do what you can, and sometimes you lose track of what really matters." Elon took a deep breath, then looked at the professor with renewed determination. "This is why I'm here, Professor. I've got the resources now, and I'm going to make sure we fulfill that promise. You won't be alone in this anymore." Professor Thornton sat back, adjusting himself in his chair. "You've done well, Elon. You've built things that have changed the world, more than most could ever dream of. But what about the promises you made back then? The ones that didn't get fulfilled?" Elon shifted uncomfortably. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I've built all these companies, changed industries, but when it comes down to it, I didn't keep my word to you. You were the first person who really believed in me. And that promise, that innovation springboard, we both know it was something special." Professor Thornton's gaze never wavered. "I remember our conversations back then. That springboard, the idea of it. It was going to be a place where young minds, people like you, could have a space to innovate without the usual constraints. A place to think without the pressures of the corporate world." Elon nodded. "I know, and we're going to make it happen. For real this time." The professor's face softened, but his expression remained thoughtful. "But Elon, there's more to this than just making it happen. We had a vision, yes, but it was always about more than just the building or the technology. It was about nurturing ideas and not having them be influenced by corporate agendas. We can't let it become just another way for your companies to pick up ideas on the cheap." Elon's expression faltered. This was the kind of conversation he had been avoiding. The reality of the situation hit him hard. What had started as a simple promise had grown into something far more complicated. He had the resources, the vision, and the drive. But that didn't mean he had all the answers. "I understand, Professor," Elon replied quietly. "I don't want this to become about my companies. I want this to be something real, something that lasts, something that nurtures creativity for its own sake, not just to feed into my other ventures." The professor didn't respond immediately. Instead, he picked up his mug of tea and took a sip, his eyes searching Elon's face. "You've changed, Elon. I can see it. The young man I knew all those years ago was hungry, restless, and maybe a little too eager to prove himself. But the man sitting in front of me now, he's different. He's focused. And that focus is going to help you make this right." Elon felt a lump form in his throat. The professor's words, so simple yet so profound, cut straight to the heart of everything he had been struggling with. It wasn't just about the springboard or the innovation center. It was about something much more personal. It was about making amends for all the promises he hadn't kept, for all the people he had left behind in his pursuit of success. "I can't change the past," Elon said softly, "but I can do something now. We can build this together, and I'll make sure it's everything we dreamed it could be. The right way, your way." Professor Thornton leaned back in his chair, a look of quiet pride on his face. "I've spent years wondering what would have happened if we had built it back then. But life took us in different directions, didn't it? And here we are now. It's not too late, Elon. We still have time." Elon's eyes lit up. "We do, and I'm not going anywhere. This time we do it right." The professor stood up slowly, his joints creaking with the effort. He walked over to a nearby bookshelf and pulled down a box, dusty with age. He brought it over to the table and placed it in front of Elon. "This is everything I have from those days," he said quietly. "My notes, the original plans, ideas for the springboard. It was all so clear back then, so full of promise. But then, life happened." He opened the box and showed Elon the stacks of papers inside, sketches, plans, budgets, and rough ideas. It was a window into the past, into the dreams they once shared. Elon gently picked up a folder labeled Springboard Plans Final Version. He flipped through it, feeling the weight of it in his hands. "This is incredible, Professor. These ideas, they're exactly what we need to get started. It's all here." Professor Thornton watched him carefully. "It's not perfect. Some of the ideas are outdated. A lot has changed in the world since we first talked about it. But the foundation is still solid. That's what you need, right? The foundation. The rest can be built on." Elon closed the folder and placed it gently back in the box. "This is just the beginning, Professor. I want to move forward, and I want you by my side." For a moment, there was silence. Professor Thornton smiled. "I've waited a long time to hear that. Let's do it, Elon. Let's make this vision a reality." Elon's heart surged with pride and determination. He had come here to make things right, to fulfill a promise. But now, with the professor by his side, he realized that the springboard wasn't just about innovation. It was about something bigger: redemption, collaboration, and the chance to give back what had been given to him all those years ago. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be challenges, setbacks, and obstacles. But Elon was ready. With the plans in hand and the promise he had made, he felt more certain than ever that the innovation springboard was the next big thing, one that would change the world, just as it had once changed him. The next few days in Philadelphia were a whirlwind for Elon and Professor Thornton. They spent hours each day poring over the old plans, making revisions and discussing how they would turn the idea of the innovation springboard into something real. Elon couldn't help but marvel at how much they had already accomplished just by re-engaging with those old dreams. The professor's passion for the project was reignited, and it was clear that this was more than just a personal redemption for Elon. It was an opportunity to make a profound impact on the world. But as the days passed, Elon began to realize that the path ahead wasn't as simple as he had hoped. They had big plans, ambitious ones, but turning them into reality required more than just passion. It required structure, support, and, most importantly, funding. Elon could provide the money, of course, but there were still so many questions. How would they ensure that this project remained true to its mission? How would they guarantee it wasn't just another corporate venture disguised as charity? One afternoon, as Elon and the professor sat in a small cafe near the university, they began to discuss the reality of what they were about to undertake. "I don't want this to become just another research lab for Tesla or SpaceX," Elon said, stirring his coffee absently. "That's not what we promised. We promised to help innovators, not to co-opt their ideas." Professor Thornton nodded thoughtfully, his eyes glinting with that same spark of excitement Elon had seen years ago in the classroom. "I agree. This needs to be a place for creative minds to explore without the pressure of being funneled into one company's interests. But how do we make sure it stays true to that vision?" Elon leaned forward, his tone serious. "We need to create an environment where ideas can flourish, regardless of what company they align with. No one should be forced to work for a particular brand or be beholden to a specific agenda. We have the resources to make that happen, but we need the right people in place to help guide this." Professor Thornton took a long sip of his tea, clearly considering Elon's words. "You're right. It's not just about the physical space. It's about the ethos, the culture we foster. This has to be a place where the best ideas win, not the most profitable ones." Elon thought about that for a moment, letting the professor's words sink in. He had always been driven by innovation, by making things that could change the world, but somewhere along the way, he had started to prioritize profitability and marketability over pure creativity. It was time for that to change. "Then we need to be careful about how we build the team," Elon said, his mind racing. "We need people who are aligned with that vision, people who understand the value of innovation for the sake of innovation, not just people who are interested in turning a profit." Professor Thornton smiled. "I think I can help you with that. I know a few people, old colleagues, former students, who would be perfect for this. People who believe in the mission and who aren't just looking for a paycheck." Elon grinned. "I knew you'd have connections." The professor's eyes twinkled. I'm not just a teacher, you know. I've got a network. They spent the next several hours discussing the details, mapping out plans for the center's structure, and the kind of people they needed to bring on board. Elon was impressed by how quickly the professor's mind was working. Despite the years that had passed, he hadn't lost any of his brilliance. The more they spoke, the clearer the vision became. The Innovation Springboard would be a place where young inventors could receive funding, mentorship, and resources to bring their ideas to life. They would offer a wide range of programs, from business incubators to lab space to collaboration opportunities with some of the brightest minds in tech. But above all, it would remain independent, free from corporate influence, and focused on nurturing creativity. But with these big ideas came big challenges. Elon knew that he couldn't do it all on his own. He needed help, and not just from the professor. He needed a team that could help bring this vision to life. People who understood the long-term potential of a project like this, who were willing to put in the work to make it happen. And so, they began to assemble their team. The first hire was Zara Chen, a young, brilliant graduate student from MIT who had already made a name for herself in the field of engineering. She was passionate about sustainable energy, and Elon knew she would be an invaluable asset to the Innovation Springboard. Next, they brought in Marcus Jones, an architecture student who had worked on designing several sustainable buildings. Marcus had a unique ability to take Elon's wild ideas and turn them into feasible, practical designs. His vision for the center's physical space was nothing short of spectacular, and he quickly became an integral part of the team. Pia Patel, a business major with a background in nonprofit management, was brought in to help with the financial side of things. She had the expertise to make sure that the center's budget was handled efficiently and that their funding model was sustainable. Together, they formed the core team that would help build the Innovation Springboard. Elon felt a surge of pride as he watched them work, each person bringing their own unique skills and perspectives to the table. It felt like a dream come true, a team of people who shared his passion and commitment to innovation, and who weren't afraid to tackle something as ambitious as this. But as the team grew, so did the questions. How would they handle the inevitable pressure to make the center profitable? How would they balance the need for funding with the desire to remain true to their mission? Elon knew they couldn't afford to compromise on their values. This had to be different from every other corporate venture he had ever done. The Innovation Springboard had to remain independent, focused on the students and the ideas, not the bottom line. As the team got to work, Elon and Professor Thornton spent more time refining the project's mission statement and values. They knew that creating a successful center wasn't just about building the right infrastructure. It was about creating a culture that fostered open minds, creativity, and collaboration. They spent hours discussing the kind of leaders they wanted to bring into the fold. The center would need a director who understood both the technical side and the educational side. Elon had already made up his mind. It had to be Professor Thornton. "You've spent your life teaching young people," Elon said one afternoon, looking at the professor with admiration. "You're the one who knows how to inspire them, how to challenge them. You're the perfect fit." Professor Thornton hesitated for a moment, clearly taken aback. "I'm retired, Elon. I'm not sure I have the energy to manage something of this scale." But Elon wasn't going to let it go. "You've been the backbone of this idea from the beginning. I need you, and I know the students need you. You're not done yet, Professor." Finally, the professor relented. "All right, I'll do it. I'll be the director. But we're going to do it right. No shortcuts." Elon smiled, feeling a deep sense of relief. "No shortcuts. I promise." And so, the foundation for the Innovation Springboard was set. The team was in place, the mission clear. Together, they would build a space where ideas could flourish, free from the constraints of corporate interests. It wasn't going to be easy, but Elon knew that this time, they were going to get it right. As the weeks went by, the Innovation Springboard project took shape at a rapid pace. Elon and Professor Thornton spent long hours working together, refining the plan, meeting with architects, engineers, and other experts who would bring their vision to life. Every detail was considered, from the layout of the building to the kinds of mentorship programs they would offer. Elon felt a renewed sense of purpose as he watched the project come together, knowing that this was the kind of work that would leave a legacy. Yet as the momentum built, Elon began to notice something strange. There were small details, things that seemed insignificant at first, but over time they began to add up. Discrepancies in plans, the occasional reluctance to share certain information, and strange silences from the team members when the discussion turned to funding and long-term goals. Elon wasn't the type to ignore red flags, and soon his gut told him that something wasn't quite right. One afternoon, while going over final architectural designs for the center, Elon noticed a folder on Zara's desk. It was a proposal for a much larger project than they had discussed. The building plans were vastly different, bigger, more complex, and far more expensive than what Elon had agreed to with Professor Thornton. The proposal wasn't just for an innovation hub, it was a multi-floor complex that seemed to be part business incubator, part research facility, and part corporate campus. Elon felt a knot form in his stomach. He had trusted the team to stick to the mission, to build a space for young inventors to explore, not to create another corporate venture that would simply serve as a breeding ground for his own companies. He didn't know why they hadn't told him about this, but he couldn't ignore the uncomfortable feeling that had settled in his chest. He walked over to Zara's desk, his mind racing with questions. "Zara," he said calmly, "what's this?" Zara looked up, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of Elon holding the folder. "Oh, that! I was just exploring a few ideas. I thought it might be useful, but it's not final or anything. Just some concepts for possible future expansion." Elon frowned. "Expansion? This wasn't part of our agreement. The Springboard is supposed to be focused on innovation for its own sake, not just a satellite office for Tesla or SpaceX. We agreed on that, right?" Zara's face reddened, and she hesitated before speaking. "I understand, Elon, but sometimes we need to plan for the future. The center will attract attention, and we need to think about how it might evolve, how it can support more projects, more research, and bring in more people. This could be a game changer." Elon shook his head. "It's not a game changer if it's just a way for my companies to funnel ideas and talent. We've discussed this. The focus has to remain on helping independent innovators." Zara's eyes darted away from him, her discomfort palpable. Elon could tell she was holding something back. The rest of the room felt unnervingly quiet, like a secret was hanging in the air, unspoken. "I'm not going to let this slide," Elon said firmly, placing the folder back on Zara's desk. "I'll need to have a talk with the team. This is too big to ignore. We're not building this to suit our needs, Zara. We're building this for them, the next generation of innovators." Zara nodded but didn't speak, her eyes still avoiding his. Elon walked out of the room, his mind racing. What had happened to the vision he and Professor Thornton had shared? He thought he had gathered the right people for the job, but now he wasn't so sure. Later that evening, after a long day of meetings, Elon returned to the professor's apartment. He had to speak to him. He needed answers. Professor Thornton was sitting at the kitchen table when Elon entered, the light from the overhead lamp casting long shadows across the room. The professor looked up, his face lined with weariness. "Is everything all right?" he asked, sensing the tension in Elon's voice. "I don't know," Elon replied, sitting down across from him. "I just found something that doesn't sit well with me. We agreed on the vision for the innovation springboard, right? We agreed it would be independent, free from corporate interests." Professor Thornton's gaze hardened. "What happened?" Elon took a deep breath. "Zara, she's been working on designs for a much bigger facility, something far beyond what we talked about. It looks like she's planning a research campus for my companies, a place for Tesla and SpaceX to recruit talent. It's not what we agreed on." Professor Thornton's face grew pale, and he leaned back in his chair. I thought we were all on the same page." "So did I," Elon said. "But now I'm wondering if some of the team has their own agenda. This wasn't supposed to be about our companies. This was supposed to be about giving young minds a chance to grow without the weight of corporate pressure." Professor Thornton sighed, rubbing his temples. "I should have seen this coming." Elon looked at him, startled. "What do you mean?" The professor hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Elon, I never wanted to tell you this. I didn't think it was necessary, but I should have. When we first discussed the springboard, I was still involved with the Martha Thornton Education Trust. After Carol passed, I stopped managing the trust funds, but I still had access to the financials. And that's when I started to notice. The foundation's investments were tied to your companies. Elon's heart sank. He had always assumed the trust had been completely independent. He had never thought twice about it. But now, hearing the professor's words, he realized that he had failed to consider how this could complicate things. I never meant for it to get messy, Professor Thornton continued. But when Carol died, I couldn't keep up with everything, and I sold off the trust's assets. They were invested in your companies. I didn't even realize the full scope of it until it was too late. Some of the decisions I made, I did them for us, to secure the future of the Springboard. But I never realized how complicated it would get. Elon felt his pulse quicken. So you're saying that you've been tied to my companies through the trust? Professor Thornton nodded slowly. Yes, and it's been a conflict I've lived with for years. When I saw the Springboard as a chance to make something real, I pushed for it to succeed, without fully realizing how far it would go. Elon stared at the professor, the weight of this new information heavy on his shoulders. You should have told me. I know, the professor said quietly, but I didn't want to complicate things for you. I wanted to believe that we were doing the right thing. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment sinking in. Elon felt the shame of his own ignorance and the tension between his intentions and the reality of the situation. We're going to fix this, Elon said finally. I promise. No more secrets. I'll talk to the team tomorrow. We're going back to the basics. The Springboard will remain independent. Professor Thornton nodded. It has to, or we'll lose everything we've worked for. Elon stood up, determination in his eyes. We'll fix it. Together. The next day, Elon gathered the team in the conference room. It was time to address the issue head-on, and he wasn't going to let it slide any longer. The secrecy surrounding the Innovation Springboard's direction had gone on long enough. The team had been working tirelessly, but Elon knew they hadn't been completely transparent with him. There was a breach of trust, and it needed to be repaired. As the team filed into the room, Elon felt the weight of the conversation ahead. Zara, Marcus, and Pia all sat at the table, their faces a mixture of concern and curiosity. Professor Thornton took a seat beside him, looking unusually quiet. It was rare for the professor to be silent, but Elon could tell that the weight of the past few days had taken its toll on him. Elon took a deep breath before speaking. I want to start by addressing something important, he said, looking at each member of the team. There's been a misunderstanding about the direction of the Innovation Springboard, and it's my responsibility to clear the air. We've all been working toward a shared vision, but that vision needs to be crystal clear. He paused, making sure everyone was paying attention. The goal of this center is simple: to foster creativity, to give young innovators the space and support they need to explore ideas without the burden of corporate pressures. It was never meant to be a tool to feed into the needs of my companies or any other business. The Springboard is about independence, not exploitation. He could see the tension in the room as the words sank in. Zara looked down, her fingers fiddling with a pen. Marcus stared at the table, avoiding eye contact. Pia shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Elon's gaze settled on each of them, his expression firm but not harsh. He needed them to understand this wasn't just about a disagreement. It was about maintaining the integrity of something they had all worked hard to create. I found a proposal yesterday, Elon continued, his voice steady. A proposal for a much larger facility, one that had elements tied directly to Tesla and SpaceX. That's not what we're doing here. We're not creating a recruitment center or a business incubator. We're creating a space where young people can experiment, fail, and try again without worrying about who's going to profit from their ideas. Zara shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She knew Elon wasn't happy, but the atmosphere had become even more tense than she had anticipated. I understand, she said quietly. But Elon, we've talked about the potential of the Springboard. There's nothing wrong with scaling up, making it larger. I thought that if we built it big, it would attract the best talent and the most attention. We could build something that would truly make a difference in the world. Elon's eyes narrowed slightly. It's not about size, Zara. It's about purpose. The Springboard can't just be about attracting talent. It has to be about giving those who don't have the resources the chance to explore their ideas freely. Corporate involvement complicates that. If people think this is just another way for my companies to pick up talent, we've failed. Zara opened her mouth to respond, but Professor Thornton's voice cut through the tension in the room. Elon's right, he said quietly, looking at Zara with a mixture of understanding and disappointment. We had a dream, Zara, a dream to help innovators without strings attached. We've both seen how quickly things can be co-opted by corporate agendas. We can't allow that to happen here. Zara looked down at her hands, clearly struggling with her emotions. I get it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was helping. I thought I was making it bigger, making it more sustainable. I know you were trying to help, Elon said, his tone softening. But you need to understand that sustainability isn't about growth at all costs. It's about staying true to the vision. It's about supporting the people who need it most, not the ones who can afford to make a profit off of it. There was a long silence, and for a moment, Elon wasn't sure how the team would react. He could feel the weight of their doubt, the hesitation in the air. But then, Zara spoke again, her voice more confident this time. I'm sorry, Elon. I should have been more careful, she said, her eyes meeting his. I didn't understand what it meant to build something truly independent. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now that I wasn't. I'm committed to making this right. Elon nodded, his expression softening. We're all learning as we go, Zara. The important thing is that we stay true to our core mission. I don't want to lose sight of what we started with. Marcus, who had been silent up until this point, spoke up. I think we all got carried away with the possibilities. We've seen the success Elon's companies have had, and we thought maybe if we had that kind of backing, we could really make the Springboard something massive. But we didn't realize how that would compromise the vision. I'm with you, Elon. We need to make this independent. No strings attached. Pia nodded in agreement. We all got caught up in the idea of scaling up, but that doesn't mean we've lost sight of the real goal. We'll do this the right way, together. Elon felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was clear that the team was committed to making the Springboard a place where creativity could thrive on its own terms. It would be independent, and they would work hard to keep it that way. Elon knew there would be bumps in the road, but this was a good start. Thank you, Elon said, his voice steady but warm. I appreciate your honesty, all of you. We'll take a step back and reassess our approach. I'm not going to move forward with anything that doesn't align with our mission. We can make the Springboard a place that really makes a difference in the world, but only if we stay true to our values. Professor Thornton, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, stood up and smiled at Elon. That's what I've always wanted, Elon. I wanted to see the Springboard become more than just an idea. I wanted it to be a beacon for creativity, for thinkers who are unafraid to challenge the world as it is. Elon looked around the table, his eyes meeting each person's gaze. We're going to do this right, he said firmly. No more compromises. Let's build something that lasts. As the meeting came to a close, the team gathered their things and left the room, their expressions lighter than they had been when they entered. Elon and Professor Thornton stayed behind for a moment, taking in what had just transpired. They both knew this wasn't the end of the journey, it was just the beginning. I'm glad to have you on this, Professor, Elon said, his voice sincere. Professor Thornton smiled. I wouldn't be anywhere else, Elon. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. Elon nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time in weeks, he felt like they were on the right path. The morning after their pivotal meeting, Elon felt the weight of the task ahead of him settle deeper in his bones. The room was still full of quiet tension, but it was now a tension of purpose, a shared understanding that the innovation Springboard had to be more than just a building. It had to be a living, breathing entity, one that was not just independent in structure, but also in its ideals. And for that, everyone would have to be on the same page, pushing in the same direction. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, late-night calls, and countless revisions. Elon and Professor Thornton worked tirelessly alongside the newly aligned team. They drafted mission statements, created project proposals, and ensured that every step of the center's development reflected their commitment to fostering true innovation. The professor was more energized than Elon had seen in years. There was something about the professor's return to purpose, his connection to the project, that made him seem younger, more alive. Elon couldn't help but admire the professor's resilience, But even as they made significant progress, there was a sense of something brewing just under the surface. A realization that, no matter how hard they worked to keep the center independent, the larger world wasn't going to wait for them to get things perfect. Elon knew that in order to keep the Springboard a place where new ideas could thrive without the pressure of corporate influence, they would have to make difficult decisions. Decisions that would require more than just strategy, but also sacrifices. Elon sat at his desk late one evening, scrolling through the latest design blueprints on his laptop. The architectural team had sent over new layouts for the center, and the project was beginning to look like something truly impressive. But it was clear that with the size and scope of the project came a new challenge: funding. As much as he wanted to stay true to their original plan, Elon knew that the center's financial stability would be crucial for it to last. He had the resources to make sure it was sustainable. But how could they achieve long-term independence? The balance between funding, control, and the center's true mission felt delicate and fragile. Just as his thoughts were beginning to spiral, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Professor Thornton. "Can we talk tomorrow? I've been thinking about our funding model and some concerns I have. Let me know when you're free." Elon's heart sank. He had expected this moment to come. As the professor had grown more involved, he had sensed that some tough conversations were on the horizon. They had been walking a fine line, and it seemed the professor was starting to feel the strain. The next morning, they sat together in the professor's small living room, a quiet place that had become a kind of headquarters for their work. Elon could sense that something was off, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. "What's on your mind, Professor?" Elon asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. The professor looked down at his hands, clearly struggling with how to phrase his concerns. "Elon, we've come a long way. I'm proud of what we're doing here. But I can't help but feel like we're approaching this the wrong way. We've been so focused on getting the building up, on making sure everything is in place, that we've overlooked some fundamental things." Elon leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Professor Thornton sighed. "We've talked a lot about independence, about staying true to our vision. But the reality is we need money. We need it now, and we need it from sources that don't have a hidden agenda. I'm worried that as the project gets bigger, we'll find ourselves compromising on our ideals just to get by." Elon felt his chest tighten. This was the moment he had been dreading. He had always known that the financial pressure would be a major issue, but hearing it voiced by the professor made it feel even more real. "You're right," Elon said, rubbing his temples. "I've been so focused on keeping everything pure, keeping it true to the original vision. But we can't just operate on good intentions. If we want this to work long-term, we're going to need a sustainable model." The professor nodded. "Exactly. We have a responsibility to the people who will come here, the young minds who will rely on us to help them bring their ideas to life. But we can't help them if we don't have the resources. We can't operate in a vacuum forever." Elon exhaled slowly, the weight of the decision settling heavily in the pit of his stomach. "So what do we do? How do we get the funding we need without losing our way?" Professor Thornton looked thoughtful for a moment. "We need to find partners who align with our mission, corporations or foundations that are genuinely interested in supporting innovation for the right reasons. It's going to be a tough sell, but we can't keep pretending that we don't need outside support. The key is making sure the right people are at the table, people who understand the value of this center and won't try to co-opt it for their own gain." Elon rubbed his chin, considering the professor's words. "I agree, but we also have to be careful. We can't let this become a platform for Tesla or SpaceX to recruit talent or take control of the ideas that come out of here. It has to be about the innovators, not the companies." The professor smiled faintly. "I'm glad to see you're still focused on what matters. I think we can make it work. We'll need to carefully vet potential partners and ensure that they understand our principles before we enter into any agreements. It's about aligning values." Elon nodded. "I'll start reaching out to people I know, some of the more ethical investors and philanthropists who are interested in helping us make this vision a reality. I'll make it clear that this is about something bigger than just business." The professor leaned back, looking more at ease. "I think that's the right approach. We can't afford to rush this. We have to make sure the Springboard remains true to its mission, no matter what." Elon felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The conversation hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. They had both come to the realization that running a project like the Innovation Springboard wasn't just about passion, it was about making tough choices and navigating the complexities of the world outside their bubble. Later that day, Elon called in Vera, his assistant, to help organize meetings with potential partners. He knew that they couldn't afford to let their principles slip, but he also understood that, for the Springboard to thrive, they had to be pragmatic about how they approach funding. As the days passed, Elon worked tirelessly, reaching out to investors and foundations with the goal of finding the right kind of partners, people who shared the Springboard's mission and would help them sustain the project without compromising its core values. But it wasn't going to be easy, and there were sure to be hurdles along the way. Still, Elon was determined. The Innovation Springboard had to succeed, not just for him, but for the countless innovators who would come through its doors, and for the professor who had believed in him when no one else did. They were about to face challenges, but Elon knew that they could handle them. Together, they were rebuilding something much bigger than just a center for innovation. They were rebuilding trust. As the weeks rolled on, the Innovation Springboard project slowly began to take shape in ways both Elon and Professor Thornton had envisioned, and some ways they hadn't. They'd worked hard to find ethical investors who shared their values, ensuring that the Springboard would be both independent and sustainable. Slowly, they started receiving commitments from philanthropists and socially responsible foundations, eager to help bring the project to life. The real test, however, wasn't the buildings or the funding, it was the people. As the Springboard's mission began to spread and more people became involved, Elon knew they had to remain vigilant. It would be all too easy to lose sight of the values they'd set out with: independence, creativity, and the freedom for young minds to explore ideas without fear of exploitation. One afternoon, Elon and Professor Thornton sat at the round table in the conference room, where the core team had gathered for their weekly check-in. Everyone was in good spirits. Progress on the building was coming along nicely, and they were finalizing the first set of programs for the Springboard's initial launch. But as they discussed plans for the center's opening event, a shadow fell across the room. Vera, Elon's assistant, entered with an envelope, her face unusually serious. She handed it to Elon, her eyes briefly meeting his with a silent question. He took the envelope, his heart suddenly heavy with an unspoken worry. Elon opened it, reading the letter inside. The words were brief but unsettling. "Dear Elon, we regret to inform you that one of the major investors we were in talks with has withdrawn their support for the Innovation Springboard. We understand that there were concerns about your company's influence over the project. They were uncomfortable with the direction things were heading. If you'd like to discuss this further, please feel free to reach out. Sincerely, the Taylor Foundation." The words stung. Elon's eyes lifted from the letter and met the professor's, who had been watching him carefully. He could see the disappointment in the professor's face, but there was something else there too: understanding. "Looks like we've hit a bump in the road," Elon said quietly, his voice tight. He turned the letter around, placing it on the table for everyone to see. "The Taylor Foundation has pulled out. They're concerned about the influence my companies might have on the Springboard." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. "That's not good," Pia said, breaking the silence. "We've worked so hard to get here. This could put everything in jeopardy." Elon leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. "I know, but maybe it's for the best. We can't let anyone think that Tesla or SpaceX is calling the shots here. We can't risk undermining everything we've built." The professor nodded. "The Springboard was meant to be about creativity without corporate constraints. If we're not careful, we could lose that purity. We must stay true to the mission, even if it costs us some backing." Elon's thoughts were racing. He had always known that there would be challenges, but this one felt different. The pressure of maintaining the integrity of the project while keeping it afloat financially was beginning to feel overwhelming. They had worked so hard to get here, to create something that was truly independent, yet now they were facing the risk of losing everything they had fought for. Zara, who had remained silent during the discussion, spoke up. "What's the next step? Are we going to try to reach out to other investors or move forward without this funding?" Elon looked at her, his mind still spinning from the news. "I don't know yet. I'll reach out to the foundation, see if we can understand their concerns, But if it comes down to choosing between the mission and the money, we're going to have to make some tough choices. Sarah nodded. We've all agreed from the beginning that the mission comes first. I just don't want to see this fail because of outside pressures. Elon appreciated her words, but he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. The truth was, they were running out of time. The springboard needed to be up and running soon, and without the Taylor Foundation's support, they would have to find a new way to cover the costs. Let me talk to them, Elon said finally. I'll see if there's a way to work through their concerns. But I won't compromise on what we're doing here. The team nodded in agreement, though the unease was still palpable in the room. They all understood that this was just the beginning, but the road ahead was going to be difficult. As Elon sat in his office later that evening, staring out the window at the quiet SpaceX campus, he realized just how much was at stake. The innovation springboard was more than just a building. It was a symbol of everything he believed in: the power of innovation to change the world, the ability to build something that could foster new ideas without the constraints of corporate greed. But as the project moved closer to its opening, the reality of running it was becoming clearer. It wasn't enough to have a good idea. It was about staying true to that idea, even when the world around you tried to pull you in a different direction. The next day, Elon made the call to the Taylor Foundation. He had prepared himself for a tough conversation, but what he didn't expect was the calm, firm response from the head of the foundation, Sarah Taylor. Elon, I appreciate everything you're trying to do, Sarah said, her voice clear over the phone. But there are concerns on our end. We've always believed in supporting innovation, but our board feels that there's a potential conflict of interest with Tesla and SpaceX being so closely linked to this project. The perception is that this is more about building a pipeline for your companies than it is about fostering independent innovation. Elon clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to react defensively. I understand your concerns, Sarah, but I want to be crystal clear here. The springboard is meant to be independent. It's a place for young innovators to grow and create without the weight of corporate agendas. I know it's hard to separate what's happening in my companies from what we're doing here, but I can assure you, this isn't about that. It's about building something that lasts, something that helps future generations. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Sarah spoke. I hear you, Elon, and I appreciate your commitment, but we have to consider the long-term impact. If we're going to move forward with this, there need to be strict boundaries. No strings attached. Elon's heart raced as he realized the severity of the situation. The springboard was more than just an investment. It was a chance to prove that creativity and business didn't have to be in conflict. But now he was being asked to prove that it was all about the mission, not the profit. I'm willing to make those changes, Elon said, his voice steady. We can add those safeguards, make sure that the springboard remains true to its original purpose. I'm committed to that, and I'll make sure we get the right people in place to protect that vision. Sarah paused again. All right, we'll consider it, but this needs to be a true commitment to independence, Elon. No backsliding. If we do this, it's all or nothing. Elon nodded, though Sarah couldn't see it. I understand. We're in this for the right reasons. I'll make sure of it. As he hung up the phone, Elon felt the weight of his words settle in. This was it. The innovation springboard was about to be tested, not just in terms of its financial stability, but in its ability to stay true to the values it was built upon. And for the first time in a long while, Elon felt a sense of clarity. This project was bigger than any single company or individual. It was about fostering a new generation of thinkers, creators, and dreamers. No matter the obstacles that lay ahead, he would not let it fail. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Elon and Professor Thornton, alongside the rest of the team, worked tirelessly to finalize everything for the grand opening of the Innovation Springboard. The Taylor Foundation had agreed to continue their partnership, under the condition that certain boundaries were established to ensure the Springboard remained independent from Elon's companies. Elon had made those commitments, personally ensuring that the mission of fostering creativity and innovation without corporate influence would be at the forefront. As the opening day approached, Elon couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led to this point. When he first received that email from Professor Thornton, asking for help with something as simple and personal as rent, He never could have imagined how it would snowball into something as massive as the innovation springboard. It had started with a simple promise, but now it was poised to become something much bigger than either of them had ever envisioned. The building was ready, the funding was secured, the team was in place. The only thing left to do now was open the doors. On the morning of the grand opening, the air was filled with excitement. The campus surrounding the springboard was buzzing with energy as students, investors, and community members gathered for the event. It was a monumental day, not just for Elon or Professor Thornton, but for everyone who had worked to make the vision a reality. They had built something that would last, a place for the future's brightest minds to flourish without being shackled by corporate agendas or financial constraints. Elon stood on the stage in front of the crowd, his hands nervously adjusting the microphone stand. The room was filled with eager faces, some familiar, others strangers, all waiting to hear what he had to say. As he looked out over the sea of people, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. It wasn't the kind of success that came from wealth or fame. It was the kind of success that came from staying true to something greater than yourself. Elon Musk, the university president, introduced him, is a visionary whose name is known all around the world. His work has changed industries, and his impact on technology is undeniable. But today we gather to celebrate something different. Today we celebrate the opening of the Innovation Springboard, a place where young innovators will find the freedom to create, to challenge, and to dream without fear of being boxed in. Let's welcome Elon to the stage. A wave of applause filled the room as Elon stepped forward, taking the microphone. For a moment, he simply stood there, taking in the gravity of the moment. He had spent so many years pushing boundaries, achieving impossible feats. But this was something different. This wasn't about rockets or electric cars or solar panels. This was about the future of ideas, the kind of ideas that could change the world in ways no one could even predict yet. Elon, the president continued, we owe you a debt of gratitude for making this vision possible. Please take the stage and share your thoughts. Elon smiled and nodded, stepping to the front of the stage, his hands gripping the podium. Thank you, everyone. I'm honored to be here today, and I'm humbled by the opportunity to speak to you, Elon began. But today isn't about me. It's about all of you, the innovators, the dreamers, the creators, the problem solvers. Today is about you. He paused, looking out at the crowd, gathering his thoughts. The weight of the moment was heavy, but Elon felt a sense of peace wash over him. Many of you know my story, how I started with little more than a dream and a willingness to take risks, he continued. But the truth is, I didn't get here alone. I had mentors. I had people who believed in me when my ideas seemed impossible. And Professor Thornton, sitting here with us today, was the first person to do that for me. He's the reason I believed my ideas could change the world. And now together, we're creating a place where the next generation of dreamers will have that same opportunity. Elon's voice caught for a moment, and he glanced over at Professor Thornton, who was sitting in the front row. The professor's face softened with a quiet pride, and Elon could see the years of effort, of belief, all coming to fruition. The Innovation Springboard is not just a building. It's not just a space for entrepreneurs and scientists. It's a promise, Elon continued. A promise that we will do everything in our power to nurture the ideas of those who will one day change the world, just as Professor Thornton did for me. The springboard is about freedom, freedom to explore, to fail, to dream. And no one will stand in your way. No one will tell you that your ideas are too big, too impossible. The future belongs to those who dare to believe. A wave of applause filled the room, and Elon took a deep breath, feeling a sense of fulfillment unlike any other he had known. This wasn't just about technology, it was about people, about possibilities, and about leaving a legacy that would help shape the future. Professor Thornton stood up from his seat, his hands shaking slightly as he applauded. His eyes met Elon's, and for a brief moment, the two men shared a look of mutual understanding. It wasn't just about making up for the past, it was about making a future that was worth building, a future that would give others the chance to follow in their footsteps. I've spent most of my life teaching others, Professor Thornton said, stepping up to the stage after Elon finished speaking. And what I've learned is that you never really know the impact you'll have until you see the next generation carry the torch. Elon and I made a promise to each other many years ago to build something that would help the dreamers of tomorrow. And today, thanks to the support of many, we've made that promise a reality. This is just the beginning. With that, the ribbon was cut, and the doors to the innovation springboard were opened. The crowd cheered as the students, faculty, and guests began to enter, eager to explore the new facility and see firsthand the space that would soon become the birthplace of tomorrow's innovations. As Elon watched the crowd filter into the building, he realized that this moment was about more than just the opening of a new facility. It was about creating something that would continue to grow, to evolve, and to inspire for generations to come. It was about fostering an environment where curiosity, creativity, and passion would always have a place to flourish. And as he looked back at Professor Thornton, standing by his side, Elon knew that together they had built something that would last. They had kept their promise. And in doing so, they had paved the way for countless others to find their own paths, to chase their dreams, and to change the world in their own unique ways. The future was bright, and it had only just begun.